Ben, Andrew gives a little head bob.
Nice.
Trying to give the energy.
Matching energy. Yeah.
Yeah.
I get into it.
All right. So welcome everybody to another edition of the Ben and Ryan Show. With us this week, we have Andrew Pendleton. He is the Senior Director of Design Systems at Verizon. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Great to have this conversation with you guys today.
And as always, the Tom to my Jerry, or the Jerry to my Tom. Pretty more like it. Mr. Ben Nadel. Ben, welcome.
Good to see y'all.
Andrew, so we'll do a deeper dive into design systems here in a bit, but for anyone listening, watching, or Ben who did some searching and couldn't find any information about design systems, can you give us the little details behind the scenes of just 30,000 foot? What is design systems at Verizon?
Yeah, sure. So I lead the Verizon design system team, and what we are responsible for is centralizing all of our design and engineering decisions, the standards, best practices. We package them all up into a scalable framework that our designers and engineers use every day to build wonderful digital experiences on the Verizon website and apps. Within that, we establish and deploy our best practices for web accessibility as well. And so I know we're going to go a little into that. And, I've been with Verizon for going on 12-ish years now. And what I really love about Verizon is that we don't see web accessibility as really like a compliance thing. We really believe that innovation can reach its full potential only when we are enabling our products and services for everyone, including people with disabilities. Just the understanding that accessible design is better design for all of our users. And so we really try to bring those standards and best practices and make them accessible to everyone who is building those experiences. So that we can really scale the quality of the experiences that we're bringing to our customers.
And talk about a company that cannot hide at all behind well, that's not my user base, right? When you hear people talk about design systems and accessibility, it's often like, well, my people who use this, it's in an intranet and they have to be on fast internet, and it doesn't really matter if they have to wait for 10 megabytes of JavaScript to load, or I only target people in the Eastern United States. It's like Verizon is everybody, including people whose perhaps only computing device is a mobile device.
Yeah.
It's just, that's right. Like a whole different world of constraints.
So now, Andrew, you were at CES just a week or two ago, and on a panel about this very topic, driving innovation with, and if anyone has not seen it, you can look Andrew up on LinkedIn. He's posted a clip of it. I got a chance to watch it earlier. Why don't you dive into this a little more? So how do you actually have innovation be actually a factor in accessibility? Like, is it, you talked about it being not just compliance. So how do you guys do that? And what are some examples of how that's happened?
Yeah, it was such an honor to be at CES, a part of that panel to talk about that topic. It was a wonderful experience, and I'm really glad that when I had that platform to talk about it and then share that on LinkedIn as well. But what's amazing about web accessibility, and what some people aren't aware of, is that it really is a driver of innovation that impacts all users of the internet, right? And so if you think about some of the basic things like responsive web design, captioning, color contrast, dark modes, all of that came about as a means for making the web more accessible for people with disabilities. So responsive web design, making sure that the experience can be magnified for people with vision issues, or even high contrast, dark modes, things of that nature. Also making things more accessible for vision issues. You see auto captioning today for images and video captions being auto generated for people who might not be able to hear. And so all of these things we kind of take for granted today just because it's been around for a few years now, mainstream. But those types of capabilities were born out of meeting the needs of users who have disabilities. And so those are some broad examples. We've seen that specifically at Verizon with really some componentry that we have within the design system. So when I say component, it's so the design system houses our reusable design patterns. So like a button, for instance, is something you see all over the place, not just at Verizon, but you see buttons everywhere and you know what you do with that button. You click it, it's got some predictable behaviors, right? Well, other patterns that we've created and really enhance accessibility are things like a video player, right? And you might think, well, what does accessibility have to do with that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, captions and transcripts, allowing people to actually read what is being said, but also navigation. So people who need to use a keyboard to navigate through the information on a page normally get stuck on a video player. Those are normally things that have to be done just right in order to hit every control in a way that you would expect to traverse that, so that you can interact with the controls with a keyboard. And also there are UI interfaces that get overlaid on top of videos. If you don't have the right color contrast, like those things become invisible. If you can't navigate to them through tabbing or other keyboard shortcuts, then the video player becomes dysfunctional. So not even a year ago, we released a new updated video component that we made in collaboration with our accessibility team that has all of that baked in. And we really had to look across, like, what's YouTube doing with their video player? What's the semantic HTML video element? What does that look like? And even some capabilities from like Adobe, and we use their Scene 7 image server and CDAM, that comes with its own video player. And so we looked at all of these examples, and all of them had robust features, but none of them had all of the things that we think needed to be there. And so we really, I wouldn't say stole from all of them, but we pulled inspiration from all of them to kind of make this like master video player that was truly accessible, meeting the needs that were put in requirements for them from our accessibility team.
Well, if I could interject for 1 second, because please. The video element is a fascinating example, because typically when you hear people talk about accessibility and the web, the kind of party line is lean on the platform, lean on the platform, lean on the platform, use the native selects and use the native inputs. Please, dear God, use a button, not a link, that kind of stuff. and you would think, oh, the video tag, the browser must just handle that. And I'm sure it does if all you want to do is hit play and hit stop.
Right.
But how do you deal with turning on and off closed captions? How do you deal with playback speed? How do you deal with the scrubber? How do you deal with, I don't know, related links that show up? I mean, so it's not just about leaning on the platform. It seems it's leveraging the platform, but then also building another layer of accessibility where it needs to be applied.
That's right. Like, we build on top of that platform. So anytime you're extending something, that doesn't mean you are fully accessible just because that base foundation was. We have to ensure that all of the functionality or capability that we add to that foundation, it maintains the that degree of accessibility. Absolutely.
So if someone's not a Verizon, what do they do? Because I mean, they're not going to be able to write their own video player most of the time, I'd say. So how do they make a decision? Okay, which one do we go with? Are there tools there that tell you one's more accessible?
Well, yeah, there definitely are tools that teams or individuals can utilize that will get you a lot of the way there. And just a disclaimer here, the accessibility criteria that we aim to achieve at Verizon is well above the standard compliance threshold, right? And so if you're just trying to hit that threshold, then many of the players that I threw out there will likely get you there. But we have what we call our gold standard of accessibility, which is kind of an enhanced YCAG 2.0 AA standard. Like that's our foundation, and we strive for AAA. Not there yet, but we are definitely an enhanced version of AA. And so,
sorry, just interject for 1 second for the listeners. WCAG, that's like the Web Accessibility something content guidelines.
That's right. They kind of set the standard for everyone of what types of accessibility features and functionality should be apparent in all web activity. And that's what we follow. And
very cool.
So jumping back in, right? The tools that are out there that are easily accessible, like just embedding like a YouTube video player, or even just using the HTML tag, will definitely get you to that base level of compliance. But when we're trying to go above and beyond that internal to Verizon, we definitely have the skill set and talent to build our own video player. And we definitely took that on, and it was not easy. And it took several rounds of collaboration and testing and even user feedback, external user feedback, to try to get something that we were happy with.
Well, let me ask you
Ben,
a question.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just to say, so design system is this fascinating world where it's really this kind of marriage of accessibility and design and human computer interaction and engineering. And you have to think about a million different form factors, from your, probably TVs to tiny tablets to whatnot. I could imagine someone coming to this world from any one of those backgrounds and having really valuable insights. What's your actual background? Like, where are you coming from before you were the head of design systems?
Yeah, it's I always just start laughing when someone asks me, well, how did you get to where you are? Because it's one of
I actually majored in theater.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a straight line, right?
Yeah.
It was one of those old family circus comic strips where the kid's running through there's a straight line path from where he was to home, and he took this roundabout path. That's what I feel like my background was. So actually came out of college with a digital art and design degree and went into graphic design. That did not pan out. I'm naturally from the South, Arkansas to be exact. We was not a blowing up design scene then. And so that was, those opportunities were tough to come by. I ended up going back to school and getting a computer science degree that turned out to be way more lucrative at the time. And so I went from graphic design, then got into application development, and decided that I actually liked talking more than coding. And so I started going after a master's degree in information systems, which I kind of it's like an MBA, but for IT driven people. And so I went that route and landed a role at Verizon not too long after they bought out Alltel. Alltel was headquartered in Little Rock, Arkansas, where I'm from. And so Verizon at that time had a growing presence in Arkansas. And at the time, there was a team being built out who was looking for web designers and front-end web developers. And I was like, I can do both of those things. Let me give that a shot. Mm-hmm. And so I took that shot, got my foot in the door at Verizon as a front-end web developer, was on that team for 2 or 3 years. An opportunity opened up to actually manage the team of web developers. Took that shot and got it. Was very fortunate in that regard. From there, I had additional responsibility added to me from not just web development, but also web testing. So A/B testing. Picked up another team who was actually building out all of the variations for an experience and then testing those variations. And then probably 2017, 2018, I started hearing that Verizon was in their marketing department was coming up with this thing called a design system, where they were trying to standardize what all of these bespoke teams were doing all across all of the Verizon properties. And I was one of those spokes, kind of doing things on my own. And the opportunity popped up about a year and a half later to lead this team, and took that shot. And my unique background of both design and engineering and several years of partnering with our IT teams kind of made me stand out as a candidate, I believe.
So when I said like, oh, you could come from all these backgrounds, you could just be like, yes, yes, all of that.
That's what's funny about, like, before this opportunity actually came up, at every point I thought I was pivoting and just like, well, that was, wasted all that time being a graphic designer. Wasted all that time in development if I'm just going to go into management. And it's like, where's this going? And then all of a sudden this opportunity pops up that leverages all of those things. And it's been a blessing, and it's been a blast. I've loved being a part of this team and being a part of what we're doing.
So I'm going to tie into one of our shows we did a few episodes ago. How did you know that you wanted to go from individual contributor to management?
Oh yeah, that wasn't a hard decision for me. It's one of those times where, like, being a part of a web development team, like, I felt competent. I felt confident in my abilities, but like looking around, I'm like, I'm never going to be as good as these other individuals. I always looked around and was like, all right, I can aspire to lean in and try to be as best I can. But it like, I don't know, like my spirit was not telling me like that was my path. But the more I had conversations with people about the projects I was working on, and seeing opportunities to, leverage empathy and understanding and get a good feel for not just what are the requirements, what do you want me to build out, but like, what's your underlying problem? And what you think your problem is that actually your problem? Can we actually attack this from a different direction, or maybe tie a couple of projects together that have a degree of overlapping things that they would like to resolve? I really felt drawn to that side of it, the communication, the bringing teams together, the inspiring certain types of projects and work, or motivating teams to pick up certain bodies of work, and kind of leaning towards the, I guess, the extroverted side. Like, I work better with people than I do working, with code in front of a keyboard and screen. Now, I feel like I understand it enough to where people can talk to me about it and I know what's going on. But where I feel like I really shine with my skill set is really just sitting down and having conversations with people and trying to understand, like, what's the core issue we should be going after.
I think, having design in your pocket as a skill set is such a superpower. And I'm an engineer. I think of myself as an engineer. I think of myself as an engineer who can think about design, but I still mostly just design in black and white and grayscale. Like, that's my sort of, and like maybe one pop of color. But to be able to build a system that essentially bakes in best practices about design for engineers, I mean, that's such a supercharge for the team in general. Because I can't tell you how much time I see both myself and other people wasting on, is that the right padding? Do I need more margin? Is that the right font color? Is the contrast on this gray for this note underneath this text area, high contrast enough? I mean, if you could just give people that and let them not have to think about it, or I should say not have to think about it nearly as much as they would without the support. I mean, it's a ingredient to a productive team that I think cannot be understated.
Totally. And I would take it a step further. And it's not, I would say, not just having design in the back pocket, but really understanding all of the different languages. I feel like a translator at times, right? Like one of the largest parts of my charter was, when I first started, was getting adoption of the design system within our engineering teams, because this was all born and bred out of our design organization. And it was just like, it was clicking with the design organization, understanding what it was there for and what kind of benefits it brought. But the engineering teams, it was a bit harder to get them on board, especially because we had engineers on our team. And so there's a bit of a stigma. They're like, wait a second, you're a design organization with engineers that's now telling an engineering team how they should be engineering. Like, you got to get past that. And so
pick a lane, bro.
yeah. Actually, that was a bit of the stigmatism, right? And so coming to that table, like understanding the concerns or having more empathy towards, like, this really isn't like a code quality thing. Like, it's going a little bit deeper than that. And to be able to position the design system as something that brings value to all parties, and being able to actually lay out the benefits, not from a design perspective, but from an engineering perspective. And when talking with design leaders, not talking about the engineering benefits, but talking about the design benefits, going to product leaders and talking about product benefits from the design system, is really what's enabled us to pick up traction and grow adoption at the rate that we've been growing it.
Well, I have to imagine you get pushback from both sides, because I can understand the engineers not wanting to be told how to build solutions, because like that's their world, is building solutions. But I imagine you also have to push back against designers who want to do something crazy over here, and you're like, there's not a button for that in our design system. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, it needs to be bigger. You're like, no, it can't be bigger.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we kind of work through all the time. Like, how do you promote the stability and consistency that comes with the design system, but still enable the flexibility that design teams need to innovate, right? And I think we were touching on this a bit earlier in the conversation, but like, the design system is not meant to provide all the building blocks you need to create a full-blown experience. We leverage ourselves as it's the common things, that's the underlying brand DNA that ties all the experiences together. That's what comes from the design system, so that when you see a button on the website or in the app or in a retail screen or in some other place, like, that it's a Verizon button, how it interacts, what it's likely going to do. And it doesn't look like we have Verizon doesn't look like it has different personalities depending on the touch point, how the customer is coming to Verizon. It feels consistent no matter where. But that doesn't mean that the retail kiosk screen doesn't have a custom, unique interface specifically tailored and optimized for that specific use case. But the things that are common across all of those ecosystems are the same underlying things to promote that consistency. So we drive the consistency part and the common DNA, but just enough to make sure they're all connected, but to really create that full-blown experience. Like, designers and engineers need to be empowered to build on top of that foundation and deviate where it makes sense to deviate.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do you draw the line, and how do you check on people, like, so that you know that somebody's not going crazy and going rogue, and now they've screwed up all the accessibility that you've created?
Well, screwed up all the accessibility that we created. We do have a baseline, like, all of the things that you're getting out of the design system are fully accessible based off our accessibility guidelines. If you use this out of the box, you're going to get all of that compliance goodness right out of the box. If you build on top of it, more power to you. We'll help you out, but it's in your house now. You need to ensure that you are meeting performance criteria, accessibility compliance, brand guidelines, all of these things. Like, just because you're using the design system does not make you not accountable for your stuff anymore. And so we still promote personal accountability, responsibility for the experiences that are going out there. We're actually looking for ways to better check in on experiences that are using the design system, even experiences that aren't using the design system, because Verizon is so vast. Like, we have stuff out there that probably hasn't been touched in years that we don't even know if customers still find and access. And so we definitely look at, obviously, the data, the analytics, where are the highest trafficked experiences, and prioritize those, and then work our way down the list, trying to cover as much of what our customers are seeing as possible. For the most part, it's been manual. It's been slow going. We are trying to build out ways to do automated checks, both in our design files as well as our code repositories, and just throwing up flags whenever we see VDS being utilized.
VDS, Verizon Design System.
This is the first time I've said VDS.
Oh, yeah.
It's the acronym for Verizon Design System, and we go by VDS. It just rolls off the tongue a lot more smoothly. So checking for VDS utilization and throwing many more flags if we see it's being utilized, but then like in our Figma files, if you pull in a component and then detach it, meaning you're going off road with this thing and you're going to start tweaking it in ways that it wasn't meant to be tweaked. We offer that ability to detach from the standard, because that's how teams can be flexible and take it further than the original use case. And that also informs back to us, okay, well, how many teams did detach button? Does that mean the button has not as many features as it should? Are we not meeting the use cases that we need to be meeting with it? And so we're trying to keep tabs on it to help inform where the system is insufficient, so that we can add things to our roadmap, but then also to check in and say, wait a second, you did that and you really didn't need to do that. And then we have those tough conversations, like you need to pull that back and just stick with the standard. It's a lot of, tough conversations with individuals.
And what is the punishment for people who can't recite the Verizon red hex codes by memory?
It's very, very easy.
Is it just like FF0000?
It's like EE0000.
Nice. I used to know the T-Mobile, not to talk about competitors, but
who? I've never heard of them.
I think they were like FF3366 or something.
Yeah. There's no punishment. It's more like a stern talking to. But also, it's not about reprimands either. It's the frank conversation, like you're making it harder on yourself.
Yeah.
Because if we make updates and enhancements to the system and you detached when you really didn't need to, that's creating more work for you in the future to pick up all the changes that we're pushing out to make the design system better.
Sorry, to touch on the making it harder for yourself, and kind of looping back in a little way to the innovation through the power of constraints. I think one of the really nice side effects of having to stick to a set of standards is that, in a way, not to excuse yourself, but like you can go down some not well-worn paths that you don't have to, because you know that that's just off limits.
Yeah.
Like you don't want to have just to throw something out, I don't know if this is a terrible example, like no one on your team is designing a scroll-driven animation on a help page where like content is flying in from the sides, because you're like, we can't be having crazy animations and all kinds of nonsense on an accessible page like that. And now people they just don't have to think about that you can take that off the menu and you can move faster with a simpler design, which tends to be much more accessible. I think that's there's something so freeing about that. That's what makes me so frustrated when people push back so heavily against an idea of having to have an accessible system. You're like, it's going to be easier to make in a lot of ways, and it's going to be easier to use.
Yeah, I love the idea of constraints causing a greater deal of innovation as well. Like one of the things we keep going back to, and I stick with the button metaphor because it's something that's very relatable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that if we're providing you with a button, that means you don't have to design a button, right? That means you can just pop it on your page and like create more complex UI patterns for your specific problem. And the more that we can standardize, the further down the road you can get faster which means more of your time can be spent on so many of the complex problems we're trying to solve across design and engineering. Totally. You don't have to spend that time on drawing a button or building a button. And so absolutely, like there's no sense in you spending as much time as you do on those common things. Spend it solving more complex, higher level problems. And people get a lot of satisfaction out of that as well.
Absolutely.
For accessibility, I knew I was going to be talking to you, so I asked one of our designers, "Hey, do you have any questions for the accessibility guru?" I kind of made you up to a guru. He had a question about some of the way that animations were happening before. Is there, for a while, there's a lot of animations in web design, and they've kind of pulled back a lot. Was that because of accessibility? Was that a driver for it, or was it just people got tired of it?
Disclaimer: This is Andrew's opinion. I would say likely yes, it was driven by accessibility, but reinforced on it's just better design to have more simple, intuitive animations, right? Because it was going crazy there for a time, and I remember going to websites and seeing stuff like that happen. I'm just like, I don't want to be here, right? Because you're not expecting it. You don't know how to traverse smoothly. You don't know how to find the thing you're looking for. It can be distracting. It can be overwhelming, and I don't believe I have any disabilities with digital screens and interacting, and it was a problem for me. So I can't even imagine individuals who do have problems navigating with a mouse and have to traverse through keyboard, or trying to utilize a screen reader to get around and having to deal with that quote unquote nonsense, right? So yeah, I think it definitely helps accessibility, pulling back on that. But again, I think it's reinforced by sound design, that making easy, simple design screens like that are intuitive and easy to navigate, everyone benefits from that.
And I have an
that's a soapbox I need to climb off.
That's a good one. That was a good one. I have an Expite question for you. So I work for a company called Expite, and one of our colors is orange, and that's our accent color. And we find it hard to get the right contrast.
Yeah.
Putting something on orange, because neither white nor black gives you really good contrast for that. So any good suggestions for us?
Oh man. The amount of time that Verizon has spent on that thing specifically, because Verizon Red, we have to be very careful with our usage of red on white, red on black, right? We've kind of tweaked that color up recently with not sure if you guys are aware that we have recently gone through a rebranding where our logo is different, moving away from the check mark. We're now the V. The tints of the reds have shifted a little bit. And anytime we do that, it is no small feat, right? Because we have to test the application of red in so many use cases, so many text sizes on certain backgrounds to make sure we hit that not just the compliant color contrast, but where our accessibility guidelines are, meaning that higher standard, so that anytime we are presenting content to our customer that is important, they are able to see it, even if they have color blindness, which there are several different variations of color blindness. And so we have to look across a range of patterns to make sure that content is still perceivable in certain places. Now, do we hit that all the time? I would say no. And when we don't, we ensure that it's only with content that is not important. Like, it's okay if someone misses that.
That's interesting.
But if it's content that we think a customer needs to see, it's important to them, we absolutely have to make sure it hits those contrasts. And we had to tweak our reds in order to get an optimal contrast across the broadest range of use cases. And even we shifted slightly in very, very specific cases just to hit that color contrast. So it's definitely not an easy thing or something you can just like, oh yeah, I'll look at that tomorrow and I'm sure I'll work it out tomorrow. Like we've spent months and months trying to make sure we stay true to what we're trying to represent with our brand, while also doing it with a color that is high contrast.
Now, how do you test for that? I mean, with websites, I'm sure you guys don't just use Lighthouse scores. I'm sure there's some better tool that you guys use, but like, what tools do you use to check? I mean, and even applications. Are there special frameworks you add or something you add to your applications to test for all this?
Not really. Nothing special. There are free to access websites that check color contrast. Like you provide hex codes, and it will tell you the color contrast, and it will show you how it would be perceived by the full range of different varieties of color blindness. And so we just use those. Like we have nothing proprietary or special that we utilize. We use what we think most people utilize in order to check color contrast in that way. And
I will just say, I'll just interject that for anyone listening, the Chrome dev tools, I'm sure all the dev tools probably do this at this point. You can actually you can go into the elements panel and select a piece of text, and it will show you in the CSS whether or not, or I say like which levels of compliance it meets, whether it's like the AAA or the AA. I don't know if there's other ones. It doesn't quite always work, but most of the time it's there.
Yeah, and there are a slew of free and accessible tools that you can use that I believe work. I'm not a fan of any one in particular. Like we try to take on 2 or 3 different options to make sure, like if this one has quirks or bugs, like we're backing it up with other tools as well.
Are you allowed to name your favorites or not?
No. I can't elevate any one tool or
okay.
I was listening to an interview. I don't remember what podcast it was, just last week, and they were talking about how they were trying to build a very accessible system, and that there are firms that you can hire that will essentially do usability testing, not necessarily to look and say, does this color comply? Does this, is this a thing, control comply with accessibility? More like there are people who have disabilities and you give them tasks that they have to accomplish. Can you complete this checkout process, or can you add this thing to the cart? And they will go through and then they will tell you, like, here's all the parts that it was very challenging to do that, or here's the parts where I hit a dead end and I couldn't proceed. I mean, you have to have actual like real budget to do stuff like that, but it sounds so fascinating.
It is, and that is something we employ at Verizon as well. We have vendor partners who definitely provide those services. We also, and I spoke about this at CES, we have an accessibility lab in Freehold, New Jersey, which is an office that our accessibility team has decked out with like areas where all of our products are set up. They have computer setup where you can interact with all of our digital flows and experiences. They have kiosks to represent like a retail store. They have a home internet and cool. Fios set up with like a couch, a big TV. And they bring people in and say, hey, can we just watch you do these tasks with our products so that we can just see how you interact with it? Can you even set this stuff up on your own, right? So we even go through the setup process for like our internet routers. And the accessibility team is like monitoring, like, oh man, like didn't think that they would go about it in that way, or didn't know that, they would run into issues here. And then at the end of it, they're like, all right, give us all your feedback. What worked? What didn't work? And it's such a valuable tool to get that direct feedback from our customers who have disabilities and are still trying to, do things that we take for granted, like unboxing a router and setting it up and going through the digital experience that connects these things. And we incorporate that feedback into our design and development workflow as well. So that is a very nice complement to like all the automated testing and the dev tools testing that you can run as well.
Well, so, okay, sorry to go off on a minor tangent here. This is so fascinating because I don't know if everyone here and listeners have seen, there's a comic, like a 3-box comic with a USB 2, I guess. What's the old USB plug? I think it's the USB 2, where it's like the guy goes to plug it in and it says wrong, and then he flips it over and tries to plug it in and it says wrong, and he goes back to the first way and it's right, you know? And then you look at something like this, which is this is like the Firewire, where it's like you can plug it in either way and it works. And I'm sure on some level that's an accessibility. Like maybe that was driven by accessibility because people who can't see the plug, like how are they going to know which side it is? But then you make it so it can be plugged in either way. And you know what? Now it's much easier for everybody. And it's like, it's just another one of those examples where you make it better for some people and it just makes it better for everybody.
That's right. And even taking that further, they're moving to USB-C now. So now you don't even have to make sure you have an Apple cable, like any quality USB-C will work.
Or even the right end of it. It's USB-C on both ends.
Yeah.
The cable can go either direction. So we flip it.
Yes.
Pretzel it wherever. Wherever.
Well, here's a gripe that I have, which is that
with Verizon?
No. With I don't know who this gripe is with necessarily. And maybe this is an unfair gripe. Maybe I'm trying to dumb something down more than it can be dumbed down. But as someone who, let's say, never thought about accessibility for the first half of my career and am now trying to be much more cognizant of it and much more aware and try to bring it into my designs, I feel like the amount of practical, pragmatic information on how to make something accessible, it does not seem to be, pardon the pun, very accessible on the web. Like, I wish that there was just a huge checklist of the things, like if you have a nav element, like an HTML nav element, should the links inside be in an ordered list, or can I just have A's? Or do I have to have an aside? Or, does my nav have to be in the header element, or can the nav be outside the header? I feel like these are questions that everybody who doesn't do this specific kind of stuff as a living will just have every time they have to tackle it. And I'm just shocked that there isn't a giant website that says, like, okay, here are all the FAQs for accessibility that everyone has had, and you just need to find the one that points to you and go with it. Like, should 3 checkboxes in a row always be inside of a field set? I don't know. It has an outline. If it does that, if I do it, should I get rid of the outline, or is the outline meaningful?
You want a universal design system.
It's not even like that it's universal. It's I feel like to some degree as an industry, we are still acting like none of these questions can be answered in a meaningful way outside of very specific context. And I feel like you could probably give someone an 80-20 list of solutions. Like, if you do this, you'll probably have a pretty good and accessible solution. And then you need some more specialized expertise to tweak it to match your design aesthetic.
Yeah, I mean, we're moving in a way where you won't have to worry about those problems anymore. You just tell ChatGPT that you want something this is where I get accessibility compliant with YCAG 2.0 AA, and it will kick something out that will probably get you 80% of the way there.
I'm so on the fence about it because and I only say that because I have had very long conversations with ChatGPT about accessibility because it's such a weak part of my experience, and I go back and forth, and because I don't have that depth of knowledge, I don't know whether I can trust it, or if it's just hallucinating, or if it's just regurgitating something that it read on a blog post that may or may not have been correct. And it's like, one example is, a typical pattern is a website will have a left-hand navigation that's visible all the time in desktop mode. And then you can squeeze the window together, and suddenly this left-hand navigation becomes, a little hamburger menu and a flyout menu. And I asked ChatGPT, how can I do this? And it said, oh, you can do this so that it's like inert when it's closed. Then you have to have an aria expanded so that when you click this, it tells. And I said, for people who can't see that that's happening, why do that at all? Like if the desktop experience always has a visible left menu, then why do I have to hide that on the mobile device for any, like I feel like I should only hide it for people who can see and have to know that that's, like if I can click and I can see that the menu's expanding, I shouldn't have to deal with the ARIA expanded, because for everyone else that can't see, they always see the navigation. It doesn't matter that it's a mobile form factor. They can always see it. And I was trying to argue with ChatGPT and it's like, oh, that's a really interesting point, but you have to consider, this and that and the other thing. But I'm like, I just don't know that I can trust it. And I certainly can't trust myself because I have no experience here. I'm just arguing with it. But
yeah, no, I mean, I love, the thing that I love most about ChatGPT is that it reveals blind spots for me personally, right? So whether or not those blind spots are real or hallucinations, it still makes me consider a world outside of my knowledge or my bubble, and makes me like jump down a rabbit hole and try to figure it out. So if nothing else, it provoked you probably to do a bigger expanded search and try to prove it wrong.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. It's like it frustrates me to the point where either just say, okay, fine, I'm just going to take what you give me, or I'm just going to go Google something now.
But the real question is after you used ChatGPT, was your code better than it was prior to you talking with it?
It's definitely, it definitely makes me think about, especially things like the ARIA roles, because again, the party line is always, well, if you just use the native platform, then you don't have to worry about things like the ARIA roles, because so many of the semantic elements have the roles baked in. But like, again, when you want to do these little fancy things where you want to have a menu that's not there and then it's there, like you do have to start to finesse it a little bit.
Yeah.
And
there's so much nuance there, right? And that's likely why you'll never have that checklist, because there is so much nuance that it depends on the context.
I will say, even for browsers, we noticed something, that it was only on Apple devices in Safari that our menu stopped working. And it was something really silly that didn't even make sense of why you needed to have this, but you had to have, I don't even know what it was now. It was something you had to add an extra attribute to the menu. Yeah. And then all of a sudden it worked on Apple devices. And I was like, what?
If only you could have confidence that if you coded it one way, it would look the same. The experience would be the same on all browsers. But no, they're all fragmented in their own ways as well. And you have to care for them as much as you can. And then you'll have different versions of the browsers come out, and then you're supporting, 4 different browsers across 10 different, updates. And now you're maintaining, 100 different versions of your code just to handle all those different use cases.
Do you guys still validate against IE6?
No, we do not.
Yeah, actually, but you must have all kinds of crazy constraints though, because Verizon has to be accessible on so many devices. You could be dealing with people who are on an iPad that they bought 7 years ago and literally can't upgrade past Chrome 87 at this point. And it's like, you have to figure out, probably it's not going to be a perfect experience, but how does it degrade gracefully to the point where they can still use it and it doesn't look like garbage?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because we've had internal debates about how we can handle that when you can't make an experience fully featured on specific scenarios, specific browsers, specific OSs, and so we try our best to bring the fully featured, full-blown experience to everyone based on our analytics, like what OSs, what browsers, what versions. We try to maximize that number, but then, sometimes you can't, you literally can't. And so the best way to go about that is that putting a pop-up that says you need to update your browser. You need to try this on a different, machine, because we just can't service you on Netscape Navigator, right? That's just not possible.
Are there any I don't know what the right term would be, like mission critical views where you ever create alternate experiences where you're like, if like we need to make sure that everybody can see our, let's say our terms of service. Yeah. And like, if it's not going to render, we're going to link you to a text only version of this because it is absolutely like, listen, it may even be legally required that you can access
some of our base pages like that are just text only. Like, as bare bones as you can get it to make sure that it can load properly. But, many of the, I would say, mission critical services, like making sure that you can update or manage your account and the services that you are subscribed to and how you pay for those things and turn them off or turn them on or add more. We offer in retail store kiosks to allow you to do that. So you can just come in the store and I know it's not the best approach. But
no, this is so fascinating because, okay, as engineers, and I think often as designers, we think about solving the problem only with the tools that we have right in front of us. And the idea that, hey, what if we just don't solve this problem by, mangling the code in the worst way possible? What if we just give people an alternate opportunity to access the system? You're like, oh, didn't even think of that. That's like so much easier.
We still have a very strong in-store presence, right? And so a majority of our customers still go into retail stores to pay their bill, to buy a new phone.
Really?
Even though we try to service as many of our customers as we can through the digital experiences, we try to push them there, but understanding that doesn't, a digital experience, like in-home phone, whatever, that type of experience is not the best experience for everyone. And so we still offer those ancillary experiences for customers to be able to meet their needs.
Yeah, I'm terrible because I hate waiting. So I am a Verizon customer, and so when I wanted the 16 Pro, I went to the Verizon store to get my 16 Pro, and so I could have it right away because the day or two waiting, I'm like, it's long. It's kind of my way. Just stop by the Verizon store. I'll just pick one up.
A day or two. That's a big deal. Like we could get it to you so quick, but not quick enough.
I'm like, it's right there.
Yeah. If I can gripe against my provider, so I have Spectrum, and
Andrew's like, by all means.
So okay,
we'll do a whole show on that.
Prospects. Have you seen the deals that we're offering?
I think Spectrum is like the option that we have here. It's not we're sort of not in horse country per se, but like we're outside of the metropolitan area. Anyway, my gripe here with them is that when we have an outage, which we maybe have like 2 or 3 times a year, and I pull up my phone and my phone has like half a bar of cellular service at that point. Cause everything, like I even have to, when I do phone calls, I use the internet calling because the cell service here is so terrible. Anyway, when I want to check the outage map, I think they finally got rid of this, but you used to have to log in to your account to check the outage map. And I thought to myself, I'm in like the most degraded experience here right now. It's like I'm walking around the house trying to find a bar, and you want to put a login screen between me and the outage map? Like that is the least accessible mindset that I could imagine. It makes me so angry.
Yeah, one of the cool features that I believe we launched last year or the year before is a way for you to communicate back with Verizon on your own cell service, your cell quality. And so if you're getting poor service, you can actually push that to Verizon and say, hey, your service is bad in this area, because then it tips us off. Oh, we thought we had full coverage. We'll investigate that and see what's wrong. Maybe there is an outage that hasn't been reported, or maybe there's something else, but we'll look into that. And it's a way that we didn't want people to just take our word for it, that the whole United States is covered with Verizon, although most of it is. Mm-hmm. Sometimes customers don't feel that. Sometimes they feel like they have bad service, or they're in a dead zone that looks like it's covered. And we thought that would be a good way to hear from our customers and like ensure, oh, you're having a bad experience. Well, let us check into that and try to fix that for you.
That's nice.
Which is kind of the opposite, not to throw shade on anybody, but we're trying to fight against those experiences. give people a way to elevate those issues and problems so that we can actually proactively solve them.
It's interesting you're talking about getting feedback. Something that reminded me of is we were on the CES panel. You guys talked about getting feedback from people and how you bring user groups in, how it's often a struggle to get them to give you poor experiences because they're thinking, oh, hey, Verizon's bringing me in. They want me to tell them all the great stuff I love about their product. So what do you guys do to elicit those bad responses or the negative comments?
Yeah, so the context around that story was specifically referring to the accessibility lab and bringing in the external customers and seeing firsthand what the experiences are to help provoke more negative, maybe constructive feedback, criticism. Really framing it in that way. Hey, what's not working for you? What would you have liked to have seen this experience be like? How could we make this better? From the digital side, like my team specifically, we don't struggle with getting negative feedback. we get it straightforward, right from the sources, mainly because we turn into a blocker in the way of getting to deadlines, right? And so teams utilizing our components, they get hit with accessibility defects from the user test or quality testing. They'll come back and say, hey, these things failed accessibility tests. If they're using Verizon Design System components, they're just like, oh, okay, well, that's not a problem I need to solve. Let me go get the design system team to solve this problem. And so we get pulled into issues that ways that give us recommendations on how things need to get improved or built differently. We'll have people asking for things that we thought were there that they either didn't know was there or that, we can improve on how we are documenting it or how we are communicating that feature out to teams. And so we get gripes, complaints, suggestions, recommendations without expressly asking for it all the time, which is great. It is great because all of that leads to overall a better system and a better experience.
I'll tell you, one of the really nice things from an educational standpoint about having a design system is that I think it gives people the language to talk about design that they didn't have before. Because if you don't think about I don't know if semantics is the right word, but like kind of what the landmarks of the page mean. It's kind of just, on the left, on the right, the list of links.
Yeah.
But once you have hero images and accordions and pills and asides and carousels,
it's unified language. We're all now speaking the same language and can point to the thing and know what the other person's referring to. Absolutely.
And it makes it just easier to think about the page architectures and the page hierarchy. It's weirdly empowering just to have the right words for things. It's like it frees up your mind to start thinking about the bigger problems because you don't have to think about the little atomic names.
Oh, totally. And the communication between people, right within the project to design handoff, the design to development handoff, development to testing handoff. Like there's no confusion around there's reduced confusion on terminology, and it just makes the handoffs more seamless.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, not again, like just reducing the confusion. Even like really things that maybe can't even be differentiated by normal people. Let's call it normal people. But like if you have a team or a system that differentiates between an auto suggest and a drop down and a menu and a flyout, which like to a normal user, that's all just like the thing that comes down when you do some stuff. Yeah. Like if you can articulate it clearly, it has almost like technological impact because now you know what it is that you have to build very clearly. I don't know. Maybe I'm making too big a deal about it. I think it's because naming is so hard.
Oh, you're definitely not, especially for companies that are larger in size and you have more and more bespoke design and engineering teams that are trying to interoperate between each other. Like, is that thing called a tile, a card, a chip? Like if I'm referring to it as a card, like maybe maybe these other teams don't know what that thing is. And so definitely the design language is a unifying factor that brings everyone to the same place to know what's going on and what they're working on.
Now, sorry, Ryan, I feel like I keep talking over you here. Are you about to jump in?
Well, I was going to say, one of the other things that's nice about with the designs is that when you have that unified language that's out there now, and that also now Google reads. So it's one of those innovations that for accessibility, there had to be a naming convention. But now because that also everyone can develop, it helps developers, then it also helps Google. So it kind of everyone's now benefiting from that universal naming conventions for objects on the page.
Yeah, very true.
From a technology standpoint, because the landscape of Verizon is so vast and spans so many years, I think most companies, when they think about, oh, we could have a design system, their first thought is, oh, are we going to build it in React? Are we going to build it in Vue? Are we going to build it in Angular? I have to imagine the world of Verizon covers every single framework you could have ever imagined. Probably there's something built with it. Because of that, does your team approach design systems from more of a platform agnostic? Like, do you lean heavily into the web components kind of technology? Or are you going in that direction? Or is it we're just standardizing on React or Angular and everybody's just doing that going forward? Or what's the strategy there?
So I would say you're right. The vastness of Verizon comes with a bevy of different architectures and platforms and frameworks all over the place.
There's some jQuery in there for sure.
Oh yeah. And we're making a consolidated effort to try to we refer to that as our technical debt, right? That we're trying to reduce over time. It's definitely
your legacy.
Yeah, it's the Titanic we're trying to turn around, and you can't just turn on a dime, right? And so we do have our base standard, our North Star architecture of like, this is moving forward. Any new applications, any new whatevers that we need to build needs to follow these standards, like these tools, these practices. Here's a blueprint. Again, anything new going forward. And so what we try to do with the design system is align to that, so that anything new, we make the design system as an enabler to that work. And then it also becomes an incentive for teams with legacy platforms. Hey, we would love for you to use the design system. You would love to use it because it would make your life so much easier for all of these different reasons. But you're going to have to update. You're going to have to make a commitment and investment to update to the North Star that everyone else is aligning to as well. And so, we still have a broad range of things being used out there that we are slowly chipping away at over time. I don't think it's a secret. We do focus on React as our platform. We're trying to decide within native, like what we're going to do with native, unifying our apps to a single framework. But then also, like, that's just web when it comes to digital. What about TV interfaces? What about our retail kiosk screens? What about, all of our, Verizon brands that aren't necessarily Verizon, like Total, Visible, TracFone.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Like what are all they using? What are ways that we, what is the product or service need from a framework? And does that align with the NSA, the North Star architecture? And so we like to say, yes, it's this North Star, but at the same time, we know we have to have some flexibility because we don't want to just shoehorn everything into a single technology, even if that technology is not the best for the customer in this specific use case. Mm-hmm. So we try to keep that flexibility at a corporate perspective. And so how does that then translate to the design system? We try to create a system that cares for as broad an audience as possible, also knowing we are a small but mighty team. And so we can't manage 5 different component frameworks.
Right.
We can't manage there has to be some standardization, some consolidating down. And so it's just a balance that we have to try to find the right balance given the design system customers, which are the designers and engineers within Verizon and what they're trying to solve.
If someone doesn't have a design system at their company, how do they start one? Like what's low hanging fruit? Do you guys start with like buttons? Do you have to do everything?
No, absolutely not. So when we started about 5.5 years ago, it started with unifying the design language. Like, hey, let's all call these things these things, right? Like, and start circulating that. 5 years ago wasn't that long in Verizon years, right? So there was a lot of stuff out there already that we jumped in and started auditing and saying, what are the common UI patterns that we see all over the place? And we started out with like 5. Now, button was definitely one of them. And we had our base fundamentals as well. Like when I say fundamentals, it's the recurring things that aren't like a UI pattern. It's not like a component. It's like color. What's our color palette? What's our typography? What are our font faces? What's our icon library? Our spacing guidelines? Our scaling? Like we try to nail those things first because that's agnostic to it doesn't matter what platform or framework you're using, you can align to those things. And then we started out small with just a handful of components and then expanded out from there. It's hard to say, like, how do you know when you have enough components? Like we only have like 40, which is not a lot. Like there are some companies that have hundreds and hundreds of components as a part of their design system. But with our charter of just like standardizing the common reusable patterns that show up everywhere, we feel like 40 is the right number. Now we might add 1 or 2 this year. We might add another one next year, but we're not adding at scale like that just to add components. Like internally, we have like if we have 3 bespoke use cases for this pattern, it's a good candidate to be brought into our design system. If it's just a kind of a very hyper-specific pattern that's used only in this user flow, then great, build it, keep it in that flow. But if there's not broad reusability, then there's no sense of it coming into the design system. That's kind of how we look at it.
How much adoption do you have? Is it 100% adoption across all of Verizon? I can't believe that's true. And what's there? And if not, what's the pushback? Why do some groups say, "Hey, not us. We got it all on our own"?
Yeah, I mean, there's been. I would say that the design system is very well received across the enterprise where it can be received. Probably one of the major pushbacks we have is really just architectural misalignment. Like we're just React. Well, if there's an Angular application out there, they can't use the components. And what we're doing is trying to work with those teams and say, yes, but you can still use our tokens. So the things that deliver our color palette, our typography, our spacing inside our grid system, like those things can still be consumed. Now, you're not getting the full benefit of the design system with components, but you're getting something. So if we go through another rebranding and we modify our font faces or our spacing sizing, like you still have something that you can just easily update and you're getting the latest from the system.
Just as a quick aside, for anyone listening who might not be familiar with the term token from a design system, I think this is typically like either a CSS custom property that gets set or like a SAS or less preprocessor variable that can be provided as like a package so that you're never explicitly referring to a color, you're referring to a variable that refers to a color.
Yeah, it's like a key value pair, right? So in your front end, you can say, make this red, generic red, and that can reference back to the Verizon specific hex code. And if the design system changes that hex code, you don't have to change anything in your code because you're still referencing red, which the design system is pointing red to that hex code.
It is funny though when brands change and you're referring to a variable that's like red 4, but like now it's actually like a deep blue, and you're like, well, it doesn't make any sense, but fine.
I've never experienced that ever. Red turning into blue. No, so that's we do measure adoption. We're actually trying to find a more complete view of adoption. So right now we're just measuring it within like our consumer space, consumer mobility. So like me, you, when we buy a cell phone or have a cell phone plan from Verizon, we are consumers. We're not businesses, right? So that's the distinction I'm making. So the consumer side, specifically with like cell phone experiences, we are bringing in all the home internet flows as well to support them. This is more like, because of where the design system was brought up, where it was initiated and born within this organization, that's kind of where we have our roots, and we're just expanding out from there. And so we have our strongest adoption presence within that space. So Verizon.com, any of those experiences, as well as the retail support, like that's where we are the most present. You don't see it as much on the business side, the B2B side, B2C. But we're trying to grow and expand in that way. You don't see us at all on our ancillary brands like the Total, Visible, TracFone. Those were acquisitions. They had their own systems. And so now we're trying to figure out what to do there. Like, how do we consolidate, or even not consolidate? How do we make sure that these are all branches off a single tree trunk, so to speak? Like, what can be shared and what needs to be, what things need to stay local to those areas. And so we're trying to fill our way out there and make sure that we are at least optimizing for the spaces that we're in, and also positioning ourselves to continue to grow and expand throughout the enterprise.
I have a quick we talked about how to start up design systems. For going full circle back to accessibility. How does a group start with accessibility? As Ben talked about, throughout a lot of his career, he didn't have to even get into that. And I know I'm a big listener to his other podcast. I guess, can we say their name? I guess I don't know what matters.
Working Code podcast.
Working Code. Go check it out. Really good podcast. A big fan. But on that, one of his counterparts mentioned that they had never had to do any accessibility in like 25 years of coding. So if somebody's like that and they do want to get into it for the first time, where do they start? Do they start just kind of picking a criteria to judge against or a test and scoring themselves? Or what would you suggest?
Multiple ways you can look at this, right? Like the individual coder, like how do I get into it, versus my company that I work at does not care about accessibility. How do I start that like movement within the company? And so, I mean, it's definitely a lot easier, I think, at the individual level. Like, it's as easy as going out there and learning what accessibility is and who it impacts, right? Like, not having to deal with, you had said they felt like they had not had to deal with accessibility in 25 years. Sure, you can get away with that, but you have to understand who you're excluding from your experiences as a result of that, right? And of course, if you're okay with that, you can continue to code for another 25 years, not worrying about accessibility. But if you're trying to make these inclusive experiences and making your content available for everyone to be able to consume, then you just start with understanding, like, all right, well, what are the different issues that people deal with? How do they deal with those? What assistive technologies are out there? What are the different ways that people interact with a site besides a mouse? Just awareness of the landscape of that would be a good starting point.
If I can throw out just two book recommendations that I've had, and it's not like I've read a lot of books on this, so this is like the two that I've read, but they're kind of very opposite ends of the spectrum. I'm sure I'm going to butcher his name off the cuff here, but Hayden Pickering, I think is his last name, has a book. I think it's called Accessible Components or Accessible Web Components. And it's a very pragmatic, you want a checkbox that's accessible, here's how you do it. You want a flyout menu that's accessible, here's how you do it. It's very like question answer. way opposite end of the spectrum is a book that I just recently read called, I think it's like What Every Engineer Should Know About Digital Accessibility. And it is not practical in any way whatsoever, but it is like an encyclopedia of, oh, you thought humans were complicated? You had no idea. Here's all the, like, if you have something that shows on the screen and it disappears automatically, like, you have to remember that there are people with mobility issues, and moving their mouse from the bottom left-hand corner of the screen to the top right-hand corner of the screen, like, that might take them 15 seconds. So you can't have that thing disappear in 4 seconds. Like, that's just not accessible. And it's like stuff like that you would never think of. So it's a very dense read, though.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing kind of takes me back to when I was in college pursuing my art degree, right? We had drawing classes where we had to learn the very practical art of drawing. And we had to be very precise, and we were trying to learn by doing. But then we had art history and the humanities and understanding, like, how are people expressing themselves through art? Like, you can do it, the practical nature of it, but do you understand that it's a medium through which there's this greater, I don't know, it's the way we're interacting with the world. And it's the same way with accessibility. There are the practical ways that you make a button accessible, but I don't know. It just feels like it opens you up so much more by understanding the underlying need, experiences that people are having that provide that necessary understanding and empathy for why it's even necessary to code accessibly to begin with. And it's so both of those things are important.
Yeah.
So you have your accessibility lab where you guys are learning how people use your sites and everything.
Yes.
And kind of then you're learning new things. Okay, we need to now code in a certain way for this group moving forward. Are there places that anyone else can look at to say, hey, we don't have an accessibility lab, but Verizon's blogging about the new accessibility things they've read, or some other groups blogging about it? Anything that you read on a regular basis to kind of learn latest accessibility trends?
I learn a lot from our accessibility champion at Verizon, which is Fred Moltz. He was also at CES speaking. He leads the accessibility team. He leads that accessibility lab. Engaging with him, not necessarily on a daily basis, but a weekly basis. He definitely grounds our team, where we're trying to care for all of the different aspects of what a design system is meant to deliver, like consistency and quality and efficiency within a system. He makes sure that we stay focused on the inclusivity part of it, the making sure that all these things are accessible, and just engaging with him and his team and how they're testing and what they're flagging and why it's important. They're just a wealth of knowledge. So probably not the answer that you're looking for, but the way that we stay like really rooted in like the latest trends in accessibility and learning new things every day is just by the constant interaction we have with his team, and how they are constantly working to make sure our components are the best they can be.
I mean, that works for the audience. I mean, they're all just going to go to LinkedIn and friend Fred.
that works.
And like Andrew said, that the best way to learn is to hit up Fred Moltz. So
he's going to thank us for that one. But well, yeah, let me tie this to like people who don't have access to Fred Moltz. It helps having an accessibility champion. So if you're trying to get this started in your company or where you work, either finding who that person is or you becoming that person. And you become that person by having a better understanding of it, reading books, watching videos, experiencing it for yourself. Many of those accessibility tools, like screen readers or ways to traverse the sites in different ways, or turning off color modes, like are freely available. And so just going and trying to interact with them and understanding, gaining that empathy for all these different types of use cases will help you become that person if you don't have that person in your sphere of influence. And so definitely making that connection or being that person, building that knowledge set is one of the first things I would recommend people doing.
And I think one of the nice things, nice is not the right word here. When we think about web technology, we think about stuff constantly evolving, new frameworks coming out, new features being released by the browser, new APIs available, new CSS properties. I think the nice thing about accessibility is it's not about evolving so much as it is always staying grounded and remembering the kind of core principles. And so it's like it's lessons you sort of have to learn over and over again, but it's not new lessons. It's the same lessons you kind of have to learn over and over again. And then eventually it just becomes, I think, maybe more baked into the way you think about building stuff.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Oh, Andrew, we're going on. Wow, this is
It is my bedtime.
Yeah. So behind the scenes for the listeners and watchers here, we started at 8 o'clock actually a little after 8 on the recording. So it is, and we're all Eastern time. So we are approaching 9:30, and it is Ben's bedtime.
I not to tell you how the sausage is made, but I typically deploy the melatonin at about 9 o'clock, and then the Advil PMs at about 9:30. So.
Cue up the rock music again.
Yeah,
there we go. I was like, yeah.
Well, this has been so great. I'm so excited to talk about this stuff because it's so important, and it's so. Even as it's becoming more a part of the zeitgeist and the conversation, it's still so vastly under leveraged and under embraced. And I don't know. I think it's really great to talk about it and spread the knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with you, gentlemen. It's been great.
And Andrew, to think about it all came about because 12 years ago, you did CF for a short period of time. And
that's right. And we didn't even talk about that. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I didn't know that part. Could have been the whole show.
About 2 years of my life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Best 2 years.
So, yeah. He got associated with a group on LinkedIn, and then I found him through that group, and I saw some cool stuff he was doing, and we started chatting, and here we are. All right, Andrew, any last minute details? If people have questions, you've pointed them some good directions. If they want to learn about design systems, can they hit you up or?
Absolutely. So the only social media I'm on is LinkedIn. And I try to do posts regularly just to bring visibility to the awesome stuff that we're doing within the Verizon Design System team, as well as our accessibility partners. It's the design system. Our design system is not available on the interwebs, which is why I try to talk about it as much as possible to bring some of that visibility up. But absolutely, any questions or anything you'd like me to go deeper on, absolutely hit me up on LinkedIn, and would be happy to have that conversation again.
All right, great. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben, for staying up till 9:29 here.
All hours of the night.
I'm appreciative. Thank you, Ben.
And thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us today. For all those watching, enjoying this, listening, thank you for bearing with us to this point. And I'd like to always steal Ben's closing. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.